Sir, wait. Something doesn't feel right.
What exactly did you notice?
It looks normal, but I keep feeling something underneath us.
A vibration? You felt that too, didn't you?
Yes, and it's getting stronger. Sir, please don't board yet.
Give me a reason. Was that the sound?
Yes, that's what I've been hearing.
So what do you see that they don't?
There's one thing that doesn't look right.
Minutes earlier, it had looked like an ordinary morning.
If you are wrong, hundreds of people will hate you. If you are right, hundreds of people will still never know your name. Maya Brooks never imagined those words would become real as she balanced a tray of fresh coffee cups while weaving through the crowded passenger lounge inside Union Station in Chicago. Morning sunlight poured through towering glass windows, casting long golden reflections across the polished floor as travelers hurried toward the departure platforms with rolling suitcases, backpacks, and excited conversations about business meetings, family vacations, and long-awaited reunions. Everything looked perfectly ordinary. The digital departure board flashed green beside Platform 9, announcing that the express train to New York would depart in just 6 minutes. Children laughed while pointing toward the sleek silver locomotive waiting beyond the platform. An elderly couple shared a warm smile as they unfolded a paper map. A young father knelt beside his daughter to tie her shoe before lifting her into his arms. Maya quietly noticed each small moment because she had always believed kindness began with paying attention. She greeted every guest with the same genuine smile, remembered returning customers by name, and somehow managed to notice empty coffee cups before anyone asked for another refill. Most people barely remembered the waitress who served breakfast before their journeys began, yet Maya never minded. She believed every person deserved to feel seen, even if only for a few minutes. Across the dining area, several security staff stepped aside as a well-known Billionaire chief executive officer entered with 2 business associates. Ethan Crawford carried himself with calm confidence earned through years of leading one of America's largest technology companies. Conversations briefly softened as a few passengers recognized him from magazine covers and television interviews, though he acknowledged the attention with only a polite nod before choosing a quiet corner table overlooking the platform. Maya approached with her order pad and welcomed the group exactly as she welcomed every customer who entered the restaurant. She spoke with warmth, instead of excitement, treating extraordinary wealth no differently than ordinary life. Ethan noticed that immediately. Unlike others who often seemed distracted by his reputation, Maya focused only on making sure everyone at the table had fresh coffee, warm breakfast, and everything they needed before their train departed. While pouring coffee, however, something interrupted the familiar rhythm of the station. A deep metallic vibration rolled beneath the floor for only a heartbeat before disappearing. It was so subtle that nearby conversations continued without pause. Maya stopped pouring for a fraction of a second and glanced instinctively toward the platform windows. The silver train stood perfectly still beneath the bright morning light. Yet another faint vibration reached through the polished tile beneath her shoes. This time it carried a strange, uneven rhythm she had never heard before. She looked toward the maintenance crew working near the front section of the train, but they continued packing equipment without visible concern. One worker waved casually to another before climbing into a utility vehicle and driving away. Everything appeared completely normal. Maya slowly finished pouring the coffee and forced herself to smile as Ethan thanked her politely. Still, the uneasy feeling remained. She had spent years working inside the station and had become familiar with the ordinary sounds of arriving locomotives, hydraulic brakes, steel wheels, and electric systems. This sound did not belong with the others. It arrived like a quiet warning hidden beneath the noise of everyday life. She carried the empty coffee pot back toward the service counter, but halfway there, she paused again. Another vibration reached the soles of her shoes, followed by an almost invisible tremor inside the glass water pitcher resting beside the register. Nobody else reacted. Cashiers continued ringing up breakfast orders. Travelers laughed while checking boarding passes. Platform announcements echoed warmly through the building. Maya closed her eyes for one careful breath before looking back toward the waiting train, her heartbeat suddenly matching the countdown clock above the departure gate as 6 ordinary minutes began feeling far too short. Before we continue, if you enjoy unforgettable stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary moments, subscribe to Hidden Tables. Every story reminds us that true character is revealed through courage, compassion, and the choices we make when no one is watching. Now, let's see what happens next. The uneasy vibration faded almost as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only the ordinary sounds of morning behind. Maya Brooks stood beside the service counter with an empty coffee pot in one hand, trying to convince herself that she had imagined the strange sensation beneath her feet. Union Station welcomed thousands of travelers every day. Trains arrived and departed with remarkable precision, carrying families, business leaders, students, tourists, and workers across the country. Small vibrations were part of daily life inside the station. Yet something about this one refused to disappear from her thoughts. She slowly looked toward the large windows overlooking Platform 9 once again. The Silver Express train remained motionless beneath the bright sky, while station employees continued preparing for departure. A conductor exchanged a friendly wave with another crew member. A family posed for a photograph beside the platform entrance. Nothing appeared unusual. Even so, Maya felt an unfamiliar weight settle quietly in her chest. She carried the coffee pot into the kitchen, placed it beneath the brewer, and glanced at the large digital clock above the serving window. 5 minutes remained before departure. One of her coworkers noticed her distracted expression and smiled. "Everything all right?" Maya returned a polite smile of her own. "I think so." She wanted to say more, but stopped herself. What would she even describe? A vibration? A feeling? Neither sounded convincing enough to interrupt the routine of an entire train station. She picked up another tray filled with fresh pastries and returned to the dining area where Ethan Crawford and his business associates were finishing breakfast. One associate checked his watch while discussing a meeting scheduled for later that afternoon in Manhattan. Ethan listened carefully before thanking Maya as she refreshed their coffee once more. "You have been taking great care of everyone this morning," he said sincerely. Maya appreciated the kindness. "I hope your trip goes smoothly." Ethan smiled. "So do I." Before she could answer, another subtle tremor rippled beneath the floor. This time it lasted only a second, but Maya noticed something else. The surface of Ethan's coffee reflected a tiny, circular ripple, even though nobody had touched the table. Her eyes immediately shifted toward the station windows. The train still appeared perfectly normal. Passengers continued boarding in calm, orderly lines while announcements echoed gently through the terminal. She looked back at the coffee cup. The ripple had already disappeared. Ethan noticed her expression. "Is something wrong?" Maya hesitated before answering honestly. "I'm not sure." She looked toward the platform again. "Something just feels different today." One of the executives offered a reassuring laugh. "Probably just a busy morning." Maya nodded politely, although the explanation did not ease her concern. She thanked the table and stepped away, her attention constantly returning to the train outside. As she crossed the dining room, she passed a maintenance bulletin board where work schedules, inspection notices, and service updates were pinned beneath clear plastic covers. One small maintenance notice caught her eye for only an instant before another employee walked in front of it. She could not read the entire page, only a few printed words mentioning a routine inspection completed before sunrise. Nothing seemed unusual, yet the uneasy feeling remained. She walked toward the hallway leading closer to the platform entrance, pretending to collect empty trays while quietly listening. At first, she heard only rolling luggage, distant conversations, and station announcements. Then, buried beneath those familiar sounds, came the same uneven metallic rhythm once again. It was faint, almost impossible to separate from the ordinary noise surrounding it. But this time Maya was certain she had not imagined it. She stopped walking. Travelers moved around her. Without noticing, the departure clock changed again. For minutes remained, and for reasons she could not yet explain, every passing second suddenly felt far more important than the one before it. 3 minutes remained before departure. The glowing numbers on the digital board seemed ordinary to everyone else. Yet to Maya Brooks, they suddenly carried a strange sense of urgency she could not explain. She remained near the platform entrance with an empty serving tray tucked beneath one arm, pretending to organize condiment packets while her attention stayed fixed on the waiting train. Another faint metallic pulse drifted through the floor, followed by a brief vibration beneath the railing beside her hand. This time she noticed something even more unusual. A maintenance worker walking away from the front section of the locomotive briefly looked over his shoulder before continuing without speaking to anyone. His expression lasted only a second, but it was enough to deepen the uneasy feeling already growing inside her. Maya quietly stepped closer to the large station windows, careful not to interfere with the steady flow of boarding passengers. Families smiled as they located their assigned cars. College students laughed while comparing seat numbers. Business travelers hurried toward the platform, carrying briefcases and rolling luggage. Everything looked exactly the way it should on a busy weekday morning. Yet beneath the ordinary rhythm, Maya continued hearing that uneven metallic sound, almost like two mechanical movements struggling to stay synchronized. She had never studied locomotives professionally, but after working inside Union Station for years, she had unknowingly memorized the station's daily soundtrack. The familiar sounds blended together into a pattern she rarely noticed. Today, one note refused to belong. Ethan Crawford finished the last sip of his coffee before standing with his associates. He thanked Maya once again and left a generous tip beneath the receipt. "You helped make a busy morning much easier," he said warmly. Maya smiled with genuine appreciation, but instead of responding immediately, she looked beyond him toward the train. Ethan noticed the hesitation. "You are watching that platform again?" he observed. Maya nodded slowly. "Does anything seem unusual to you?" Ethan followed her gaze through the glass. Passengers continued boarding. Conductors assisted elderly travelers. A station employee checked departure paperwork near the first passenger car. Everything appeared orderly. Ethan looked back at Maya with a thoughtful expression. "Honestly, everything looks normal." Maya wished she could agree. Before she answered, another low vibration passed beneath the polished floor. This time Ethan paused as well. It was so slight that he almost dismissed it, but he had felt it too. Probably another train moving somewhere nearby, one of his associates suggested casually. The explanation sounded reasonable, yet Maya remained unconvinced. She quietly thanked them and watched as they collected their luggage before heading toward the boarding gate. Her heartbeat became just a little faster. Across the platform, Richard Hale, the railway operations manager responsible for supervising departures that morning, checked his watch while speaking with several crew members. He moved confidently from one employee to another, signing paperwork and urging everyone to stay on schedule. Efficiency clearly mattered to him. Maya considered walking over to mention what she had noticed, but doubt stopped her. What exactly would she report? A sound that nobody else seemed to hear? A feeling she could not explain? She knew how easily such concerns could be dismissed, especially coming from a restaurant waitress rather than a transportation specialist. Still, every instinct urged her not to ignore it. As she watched the final boarding announcements appear across the digital display, a young boy standing near the window pressed both hands against the glass and smiled excitedly at the waiting train. His mother stood beside him while an elderly veteran adjusted the strap on his travel bag only a few feet away. Maya recognized several regular passengers she had served breakfast to dozens of times over the years. They trusted that train the same way they trusted every departure before it. Looking at those familiar faces, Maya suddenly realized her greatest fear was not being embarrassed if she spoke up. Her greatest fear was remaining silent if something truly was wrong. 2 minutes remained before departure. The announcement echoed gently through Union Station, reminding passengers to board the express train as though it were another perfectly ordinary morning. Around Maya Brooks, nobody appeared worried. The young family she had noticed only moments earlier smiled while finding their seats. The elderly veteran carefully adjusted his jacket before stepping toward the platform. Ethan Crawford and his associates picked up their travel bags and joined the steady line of passengers moving toward the train. The station continued breathing with quiet confidence, but Maya could no longer ignore the feeling growing inside her. Another faint vibration traveled through the polished floor, slightly stronger than before. She looked toward the large station clock, then toward the locomotive. This time she noticed something so subtle that almost anyone else would have overlooked it. One of the small inspection panels near the front section of the train appeared slightly misaligned. It was only an inch or two, barely visible beneath the bright morning sunlight reflecting off the silver exterior, yet the uneven line caught her attention immediately. She had walked past hundreds of trains during the past 4 years. Clean lines, tightly secured panels, and precise maintenance routines had become part of the scenery she unconsciously memorized every day. This looked different. She stepped closer to the platform entrance, trying to convince herself she was mistaken. Richard Hale stood nearby, speaking confidently with several crew members while signing departure paperwork on a digital tablet. Every few seconds, he glanced toward the station clock, clearly focused on keeping the schedule moving without delay. Maya considered approaching him, but uncertainty held her back once again. She was a waitress. Richard managed railway operations. Why would he believe her observation over the work of trained maintenance crews? Still, another metallic rhythm reached her ears. It was faint, uneven, and strangely irregular, almost as though two mechanical systems briefly slipped out of harmony before returning together again. Ethan happened to slow his pace as he noticed Maya still standing near the entrance instead of returning to the restaurant. Their eyes met across the lobby. "Everything all right?" he asked with genuine concern. Maya hesitated before answering. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan nodded. "Of course." Maya looked toward the waiting train before speaking quietly. "Have you ever had the feeling that something looks normal, but somehow it does not feel right?" Ethan followed her gaze once more. The platform remained calm. Conductors greeted passengers. Crew members continued preparing for departure. Nothing obvious suggested danger. Sometimes, he admitted, but feelings can be difficult to explain. Maya nodded slowly. "I know." She wished she had something more concrete than instinct. Something people could see instead of simply believe. Behind them, another boarding announcement sounded through the station, asking remaining passengers to proceed immediately because departure was approaching. Richard Hale looked toward the restaurant entrance and noticed Maya lingering near the platform instead of working. He walked several steps in her direction, his expression showing impatience rather than curiosity. "Miss," he called firmly, "passengers need clear access to the boarding area." Maya stepped aside respectfully. "I understand." She almost let the moment pass, almost returned to the dining room, almost convinced herself to stay silent. Then another vibration rolled beneath her shoes, strong enough to make the metal service cart beside the entrance produce a brief rattling sound. It lasted less than a second before disappearing completely. Maya instinctively placed one hand against the cart. Ethan heard the sound as well and turned back toward her. Neither spoke. Around them, dozens of passengers continued boarding without noticing anything unusual. The countdown clock changed again. 1 minute remained. Maya drew a slow breath, looked from the train to the families, to the elderly travelers, to Ethan standing only a few yards away, and quietly realized that if she said nothing now, she might spend the rest of her life wondering whether one sentence could have changed everything. Maya Brooks did not recognize her own voice until it tore across Platform 9. For one suspended second, Union Station seemed to forget how to breathe. Richard Hale stopped with his tablet halfway raised. A conductor turned sharply. Passengers nearest the gate stared at the black waitress, standing beyond the restaurant entrance, as if she had shouted something impossible. Ethan Crawford froze several yards from the first passenger car. "What did you say?" Richard demanded. Maya's hands trembled, but her answer did not. "Do not let that train leave." Richard stared at her. "On what basis?" The departure signal changed. Less than a minute remained. Maya pointed toward the front section of the train. "There's a vibration coming from that end. It keeps repeating, and that inspection panel isn't sitting correctly." Richard's expression tightened. "Maintenance cleared this train." "Then check it again." A few passengers began whispering. One man glanced impatiently at his watch. Someone farther back complained that they were going to miss a connection. Richard lowered his voice. "Miss Brooks, you work in the restaurant. You're not qualified to make mechanical assessments." The words landed exactly where Maya had feared they would. She felt every I'm measuring her uniform, her apron, the tray she had abandoned near the doorway. For 4 years, that uniform had made her useful when someone wanted coffee and nearly invisible when they did not. But the little boy she had seen earlier was already inside the train. So was the elderly veteran. So were hundreds of people who had no idea why she was afraid. Maya stepped closer. "You're right. I'm not a mechanic, but I know what this station sounds like. I hear these trains every day. Something is wrong." Richard shook his head and motioned toward the conductor. "Proceed." The conductor reached toward the controls. Then Ethan stepped out of the boarding line. "Wait." Richard looked at him, recognition changing his posture almost immediately. "Mr. Crawford?" Ethan glanced at Maya, then at the locomotive. I felt the vibration too. That did not prove Maya was right, and Ethan knew it, but it proved she was not imagining everything. Richard hesitated. The platform clock continued counting down. 30 seconds, a crew member called. Maya heard the metallic rhythm again. Louder, closer. A service cart rattled against the wall. This time several people turned. Maya ran toward the gate. Richard moved instinctively to block her. "Miss Brooks, look," she shouted, pointing toward the misaligned panel. Beneath its lower edge, something flickered, a brief, irregular movement where everything should have been still. Richard's confidence finally cracked. He grabbed his radio. "Hold departure. Platform 9. Hold departure." Nothing happened. The departure sequence had already begun. A warning tone sounded. Doors started closing along the train. Maya saw Ethan still outside, but dozens of passengers were already seated inside, unaware of the argument unfolding beyond the windows. Richard spoke into his radio again, louder this time. "Cancel departure. Cancel departure immediately." A crew member answered through static. "Command received too late. We're already in sequence." The locomotive gave a low mechanical hum. Maya's face drained of color. Richard stared toward the control station. Ethan stared at Maya, and Maya realized that speaking up had only been the first decision. The second would require her to do something nobody on that platform would ever forget. The train moved. Barely. A slow metallic pull passed through the cars as the couplers tightened one after another. And that tiny movement transformed uncertainty into terror inside Maya Brooks. "Emergency stop." Richard Hale shouted into his radio. A conductor near the rear raised both arms, signaling frantically toward the engineer. Passengers inside looked through the windows, confused by the commotion. Maya did not know the technical procedures. She did not know which control system governed the locomotive or how many seconds remained before momentum became dangerous. She knew only what she could see. The train was beginning to roll, and the uneven metallic rhythm had become a harsh repeating. Knock. Ethan Crawford heard it now without needing Maya to explain. So did Richard. "What is that?" Ethan asked. Richard did not answer. His eyes were fixed on the front section. Maya suddenly remembered the maintenance notice she had glimpsed earlier. Routine inspection completed before sunrise. She turned and ran. "Where are you going?" Ethan called. She sprinted toward the bulletin board outside the restaurant, pulled the clear cover open, and scanned the notice with shaking hands. "Brake assembly inspection. Front truck. Follow-up recommended." Her breath caught. A handwritten notation near the bottom had been partially covered by another sheet. Vibration reported during low-speed test. Reinspect before service. Maya tore the notice free and ran back. The train had moved several more feet. Richard, she held out the page. He read it once, then again. The color left his face. This follow-up wasn't on my digital clearance. But it was here, Maya said. Richard grabbed his radio. Full emergency hold. Possible unresolved front assembly issue. Cut movement now. The platform erupted with overlapping voices. Crew members waved signals. Inside the cars, passengers began standing. Then came a sharp metallic crack from beneath the front section. Not an explosion, not a collision, but a sound violent enough to erase every conversation around it. The locomotive stopped. The cars rocked gently behind it. A child screamed. Luggage shifted overhead. Then everything became still. Maya stood frozen with the maintenance sheet clenched between her fingers. Richard ordered the train evacuated and requested an emergency mechanical inspection. Doors reopened. Nearly 300 passengers began stepping back onto the platform. Frightened, irritated, bewildered. Some demanded explanations. Others simply held their children closer. Ethan remained beside Maya. You heard it before any of us, he said quietly. Maya could not answer. Her knees felt weak. 20 minutes later, 2 senior engineers emerged from beneath the front assembly. Their expressions told Richard the truth before either man spoke. One pointed toward the restricted area beneath the locomotive. The train cannot move. Richard swallowed. How serious? The engineer looked toward the crowded platform, then back at him. Serious enough that stopping it was the right decision. Maya closed her eyes. She had spent the last 6 minutes afraid of being wrong. Now, for the first time, she understood that being right could be far more frightening. The official inspection took 43 minutes, but for Maya Brooks, it felt longer than the 4 years she had worked at Union Station. Passengers gathered behind temporary barriers, while railway technicians moved beneath the front section of the train with flashlights and diagnostic equipment. Richard Hale stood nearby, speaking in clipped sentences into 2 different radios. His earlier impatience had vanished. Ethan Crawford had canceled his Manhattan meeting without explanation and remained at the station. Watching Maya sit alone on a bench with her hands wrapped around a paper cup of water she had not touched. Finally, the senior engineer approached, Richard carrying several photographs on a tablet. We found a compromised component in the front-running assembly, he said. The abnormal vibration was consistent with progressive mechanical instability. Richard's jaw tightened. Would have failed. The engineer chose his words carefully. We cannot say precisely when, but this train should never have been released for passenger service until the follow-up inspection was completed. Richard looked toward the hundreds of people behind the barrier. At speed, the engineer paused. The consequences could have been severe. No one needed a more dramatic explanation. Richard closed his eyes for a moment. Nearly 300 passengers. Families. Children. Workers. An elderly veteran. Ethan Crawford. All of them had been seconds away from leaving Chicago aboard a train, carrying a problem that had already announced itself once before sunrise, and then again beneath the shoes of a waitress nobody had been trained to listen to. Richard walked toward Maya. She stood when she saw him coming. Miss Brooks. His voice sounded different now. Maya is fine. Richard looked at the floor before meeting her eyes. Maya, I owe you an apology. Nearby conversations softened. You raised a safety concern. I dismissed it because you weren't part of the operations team. Maya said nothing. Richard continued. That was wrong. She looked toward the evacuated passengers. I didn't need to be right. Her voice was quiet. I just needed somebody to check. Those words struck Richard harder than anger would have. Ethan stepped closer, but allowed the silence to remain. Maya was not celebrating. She was not demanding recognition. She was thinking about the little boy whose hands had been pressed excitedly against the glass. The boy now stood beside his mother eating crackers from a vending machine, completely unaware of how differently his morning might have ended. Ethan followed Maya's gaze. You saved them, he said. Maya shook her head. The engineers stopped the train. Because you made people listen. Before Maya could respond, Applause began somewhere behind her. One passenger, then another. The elderly veteran lifted his hand first. A mother joined him. Within seconds, the sound traveled across Platform 9. Maya turned slowly. Hundreds of strangers were looking at her. She lowered her eyes, overwhelmed. She had spent years serving people who forgot her face before reaching their trains. That morning, almost 300 people would remember it. But the story was not finished, because while everyone was thanking Maya for noticing the danger, investigators were beginning to ask a different question. If the follow-up inspection had been written down before sunrise, why had the train been cleared to depart at all? By noon, Platform 9 had become an investigation scene. The passengers were transferred to another train after complete safety checks, but several remained long enough to give statements. Railway supervisors reviewed maintenance logs while technicians compared the paper notice Maya had found with the digital clearance Richard Hale had received. The discrepancy was impossible to ignore. At 4:52 that morning, a maintenance technician had documented an unusual vibration during a low-speed test and recommended a second inspection before passenger service. At 5:18, the recommendation appeared on the physical bulletin. Yet somewhere between that warning and the scheduled departure, the digital status had been marked cleared. Richard stared at the timestamps. Who changed this? A compliance officer shook her head. That is what we're determining. Maya listened from several feet away. She felt no satisfaction. She had not wanted someone punished. She had wanted a train checked. But accountability had its own momentum. Ethan understood that better than most. He had built his company by studying systems. How small failures became large failures when people were afraid to delay schedules, challenge authority, or admit uncertainty. This wasn't one person hearing a strange noise, he told Richard. Someone already heard it hours ago. Richard nodded grimly. And the warning didn't reach me. Then the problem is bigger than one missed inspection. Maya looked at Ethan. What do you mean? He turned toward her. Systems fail when information stops moving upward. Sometimes because software is bad. Sometimes because procedures are bad. Sometimes because people learn that speaking up costs more than staying quiet. Maya thought about the moment Richard had reminded her she was a waitress. He saw the recognition in her face. Exactly, Ethan said. Richard heard him. To his credit, he did not defend himself. I was part of that this morning. Maya studied him for a moment. Then be part of fixing it. Richard looked surprised. There was no triumph in her voice, only expectation. By afternoon, preliminary findings suggested that a rushed handoff between maintenance teams had allowed the unresolved warning to disappear from the active departure checklist. There was no conspiracy, no hidden villain, no dramatic sabotage. Only something more ordinary and therefore more unsettling. People trusted a green status indicator more than an unresolved human observation. The railway suspended several departures using the same inspection workflow and ordered immediate reviews. News crews arrived outside Union Station after passengers began posting about the delayed train and the waitress who had shouted for it to stop. Maya avoided every camera she could. When a reporter finally caught her near the restaurant entrance and asked how it felt to be a hero, Maya answered with the simplest truth she knew. I'm not a hero. I noticed something, and I didn't want anybody to get hurt. Ethan heard the answer from behind the crowd. For a man accustomed to executives turning every success into a press release, Maya's refusal to turn courage into performance unsettled him in the best possible way. She had possessed no authority that morning, no title, no influence. Yet when authority failed to notice what mattered, she had supplied the one thing the entire system lacked, the courage to interrupt it. By the following morning, Maya Brooks had become the most recognizable employee in Union Station, and she hated almost every second of it. Her photograph appeared on local television beside headlines describing the last-second stop at Platform 9. Passengers had uploaded videos showing her shouting toward railway staff. One clip captured Ethan Crawford stepping out of the boarding line just before Richard Hale ordered the emergency hold. Another showed nearly 300 passengers returning to the platform minutes before engineers declared the train unsafe for service. Maya's co-workers crowded around a phone in the restaurant kitchen, reading comments aloud. They're calling you the guardian of Platform 9, one said. Maya covered her face. Please tell me that isn't real. They laughed, but Maya did not feel heroic. She remembered the fear. She remembered Richard telling her she was not qualified. Most of all, she remembered how close she had come to believing him. At 10 that morning, Ethan returned to the restaurant alone. No assistants, no security detail hovering beside him. He chose the same corner table and ordered coffee. Maya approached with a cautious smile. Miss your train again? Ethan smiled, deliberately this time. He placed a folded newspaper on the table, but did not open it. My company has 27,000 employees, he said. Do you know what scares me after yesterday? Maya shook her head. How many of them have noticed something important and stayed silent because someone with a better title made them feel small? Maya set down his coffee. That sounds like a question for your employees. It is. Ethan looked at her, and I intend to ask them. He explained that Crawford Technologies would begin reviewing its internal reporting culture, especially procedures allowing frontline workers to flag safety, quality, or ethical concerns without needing management approval. Maya listened, surprised. Because of what happened here? Because what happened here exposed something I should have understood years ago. Ethan paused. Expertise matters, but attention matters too, and hierarchy can make smart people stop listening. Maya glanced toward the platform windows. Just don't turn me into some corporate slogan. Ethan laughed softly. Deal. Then his expression became serious. I also came because I wanted to offer you something. Maya immediately raised one eyebrow. Here it comes. Not money. Good. A conversation. Ethan told her his company funded workforce scholarships and technical training programs in Chicago. He had learned from one of her coworkers that Maya had once taken community college courses in industrial design before financial pressure forced her to stop. Maya's face changed. You've been asking about me? Only enough to understand whether there was a door you wanted reopened. He slid a small card across the table. No check, no contract, just the contact information for the scholarship director. No obligación, no publicity. You decide. Maya stared at it. For years, powerful people had decided what someone wearing her uniform could contribute. Ethan was offering something different. Not rescue, but access. She picked up the card and slipped it into her apron. A conversation, she repeated. That's all, Ethan said. Outside, another train arrived safely at Platform 9, and Maya noticed that she listened to its rhythm differently now. The railway's internal report was released 3 weeks later, and its conclusion was uncomfortable precisely because it was ordinary. No saboteur had targeted the train. No secret criminal plot had hidden beneath Platform 9. A maintenance warning had been recorded correctly, then weakened by a rushed shift change. An incomplete digital handoff, schedule pressure, and several assumptions made by people who believed someone else had already checked. The report stated that Maya Brooks's observations had provided the final independent warning that triggered the emergency intervention. Richard Hale requested that his own failure be included in the review. When a supervisor suggested softening the language, he refused. I dismissed her, he said. If we hide that, we learn nothing. Maya heard about his decision when he visited the restaurant after his shift. I wanted you to know, he told her. The new procedure requires any safety concern from any station worker, restaurant, cleaning, security, anyone, to be logged and reviewed before departure if it involves equipment. Maya smiled slightly. Even waitresses? Richard accepted the question, especially the ones I was foolish enough not to listen to. She extended her hand. Richard shook it. That mattered more to Maya than a public apology because it meant the lesson had moved beyond one embarrassing morning. Across the city, Ethan was making changes of his own. Crawford Technologies launched an internal program allowing frontline employees to challenge operational decisions without retaliation. He refused his communications department's suggestion to name the initiative after Maya. She specifically told me not to turn her into a slogan, he reminded them. Instead, the program carried a simple instruction. Notice. Speak. Listen. Maya eventually called the scholarship director whose card Ethan had given her. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. A month later, she enrolled in 2 evening courses in systems design and human factors while keeping reduced shifts at the restaurant. She discovered that the instincts she had developed by paying attention to people and patterns were not the opposite of technical thinking. They were part of it. Ethan never pretended he had discovered her talent. That distinction mattered. Maya had possessed it long before he sat at her table. He had simply been present on a morning the world was forced to notice. When reporters continued asking Ethan about the incident, he gave them the same answer. The most important person at Union Station that morning wasn't the richest person there. It was the person willing to say something was wrong. Some headlines framed the story as a billionaire saved by a waitress. Maya disliked that description too. Ethan understood why. There had been almost 300 lives on that train. His bank account did not make his life heavier than theirs. That was the deepest reversal of all. On Platform 9, money had purchased no special warning. Status had offered no protection. Everyone had depended on the same pair of attentive eyes and the same courageous voice. 6 months after the morning that changed Platform 9, Maya Brooks walked through Union Station carrying books instead of serving tray. She still worked 3 shifts each week at the restaurant, but her evenings belonged to classrooms, design labs, and assignments that sometimes kept her awake long after midnight. The schedule was exhausting. She loved it. On a bright Monday morning, she stopped near the platform where everything had happened. A small safety display had been installed beside the departure board. It contained no photograph of Maya at her request. Instead, a single sentence appeared beneath the railway logo. If something seems wrong, speak up. Every voice counts. Maya read it twice. Better than a statue, Ethan said behind her. She turned and found him holding 2 coffees. Much better. He handed one to her. Ethan was traveling to New York again, this time on the same route he had nearly taken months earlier. Nervous? Maya asked. About the train? About listening to the waitress. Ethan smiled. I learned that lesson. Their friendship had developed quietly, without dramatic gifts or impossible promises. Sometimes Ethan emailed her an article about systems engineering. Sometimes Maya sent back a question sharp enough to make one of his senior executives reconsider an assumption. He had introduced her to mentors, but never asked for anything in return. Maya had insisted on that boundary from the beginning. Gratitude, she believed, should open doors, not create debts. An announcement called passengers toward Platform 9. Ethan lifted his bag. Before leaving, he looked toward the safety display. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you stayed quiet? Maya stared through the glass of the train. Sometimes. And she took a slow breath. Then I remember that I almost did. That was the part nobody put in the headlines. Courage had not arrived because Maya was fearless. Courage had arrived while she was terrified of being ridiculous, reprimanded, or wrong. She had spoken anyway. Ethan nodded as though committing the answer to memory. Then a little boy hurried past them with his mother. Maya recognized him immediately. The same child who had pressed his hands against the window 6 months earlier. His mother recognized Maya too. She stopped. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then the mother stepped forward and hugged her. He turned 7 last week, she whispered. Maya closed her eyes. No television interview, award, scholarship, or corporate initiative had ever made the meaning of that morning feel so real. 7 years old. A birthday cake. Another year of ordinary mornings. Another year his mother could hold his hand. After they walked away, Maya wiped one tear from her cheek. Ethan said nothing. He understood that some moments became smaller when explained. The boarding call sounded again. He headed toward the train, then turned. See you when I get back? Maya raised her coffee. If you bring better coffee. Ethan laughed and disappeared into the crowd. Maya remained beneath the enormous station clock, surrounded by strangers moving toward hundreds of different destinations. Once, she had believed being unnoticed meant being unimportant. She knew better now. 1 year later, the morning light returned to Union Station almost exactly as Maya Brooks remembered it. Gold across the windows, footsteps across polished floors, departure announcements blending with rolling luggage and hurried goodbyes. But Maya was no longer wearing the restaurant apron. She stood near Platform 9 with an identification badge clipped to a navy jacket. Human Factors safety intern. After completing her first year of coursework, she had earned a paid placement with an independent transportation safety. program working alongside station operations. Nobody had handed her the position. She had applied, interviewed, studied, failed one brutal statistics exam, passed it the second time, and earned her place. Richard Hale greeted her near the platform. He had become one of the strongest advocates for the reporting reforms created after the incident. "Morning, Brooks." "Morning, Hale." A year earlier, he had seen a waitress standing where she did not belong. Now he routinely asked her what frontline employees were noticing that management might be missing. Ethan Crawford arrived 20 minutes later for a small safety forum being held inside the station. He had been invited to discuss how the incident changed reporting culture inside his own company. When he saw Maya's badge, he smiled. "Looks official." Maya glanced down at it. "Don't get comfortable. I still question billionaires. That is apparently your specialty." They laughed. Then Ethan became quiet. "You know, people still tell this story as the day you saved me." Maya looked around Platform 9. Travelers boarded another train. A nurse carrying a backpack, 2 college students arguing cheerfully about seats, an older couple sharing one suitcase, a father lifting his sleepy daughter into his arms. "That's never been the story," she said. Ethan followed her gaze and understood. Almost 300 people had been aboard that train. 300 futures. 300 families waiting somewhere. 300 collections of birthdays, arguments, graduations, ordinary dinners, unfinished plans, and people who expected them to come home. A billionaire had been one passenger among them. Nothing more, nothing less. The announcement system chimed. Maya listened instinctively as a locomotive idled beyond the glass. Smooth, even, familiar. She smiled. The sound no longer frightened her, but she never stopped listening. Maybe that was the real lesson of Platform 9. The world often teaches us to look upward for wisdom, to titles, wealth, credentials, uniforms, offices. But sometimes the person who sees the danger is carrying coffee. Sometimes the person who changes the system has no authority inside it. Sometimes, courage is simply refusing to let your uncertainty become your silence. Maya had not shouted because she knew she was right. She shouted because 300 strangers deserved the chance for someone to check. And when power finally listened, lives were protected, procedures changed, and doors opened that should never have been closed. So if this story stays with you, remember Maya's choice the next time something feels wrong and everyone else keeps walking. Pay attention. Speak with courage. Listen without arrogance. Because dignity does not come from a title, and wisdom does not ask permission to wear a uniform. He had the power to own the room. She had the courage to change it. And that morning, courage was worth more than billions.